an unfair price for the Apache woman, until a rancher decided to take her home. The air was dry, and the scent of the earth mixed with smoke from chimneys and the occasional whiff of livestock. People walked hurriedly along the boardwalks, their boots kicking up clouds of dust that floated lazily before settling back down on the parched ground. Life in this town was hard, unforgiving, and many people carried their burdens quietly, without complaint. Among them was a young Apache woman named Ahuli. Ahuli's dark eyes reflected the strength and intelligence of her people. Her hair, long and black as a raven's wing, was tied back simply, revealing high cheekbones and a face that had known both hardship and resilience. She moved with a quiet grace, almost as if the earth itself guided her steps. But despite her natural poise, today she felt a weight in her chest, a heaviness that came from knowing that she was being treated not as a person, but as an object to be bought and sold. The town's market was crowded, a chaotic mix of shouts, laughter, and the clanging of metal from merchants' stalls. Wooden carts creaked under the weight of vegetables, grains, and trinkets from faraway lands. Among these goods, Ahuli stood at the center of attention, though not by choice. She had been brought here by traders who thought of her only as property. The men whispered amongst themselves, making calculations, trying to decide what her worth was. Every word they spoke was a reminder of the cruel reality she faced. Ahuli kept her head high, refusing to show fear, though her heart raced. She remembered stories her mother had told her about the strength of their ancestors, about the Apache people's ability to endure hardships and fight for freedom. She clung to those stories like a lifeline, finding courage in the knowledge that no one could take away her spirit, no matter how unfair the world might be. The traders haggled loudly, their voices rising over the noise of the market. One man, tall and thin, waved his hands and offered a sum far lower than the others. "She's strong, yes, but only worth this," he said, pointing to a few coins in his palm. Ahuli felt a flash of anger, though she did not speak. She could see the greed in their eyes, the way they reduced her life to numbers and coins. The idea that her future could be decided by such men made her stomach twist. People passed by, glancing at her with curiosity or indifference. Some whispered quietly to each other, and Ahuli caught fragments of their conversations. Words like cheap, worthless, and easy profit stung more than any physical blow. She wanted to scream, to tell them all that she was more than a price, more than a possession, but she held her tongue. Survival required patience, and Ahuli had learned that patience could sometimes be the sharpest weapon of all. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the heat pressed down on the market, making the air feel thick and heavy. Ahuli wiped the sweat from her brow and looked around for any sign of hope. That's when she noticed a man standing a little apart from the crowd, watching quietly. He was different from the others. His clothes were rugged but neat, his eyes calm and steady. He did not speak loudly or make demands. Instead, he seemed to be observing everything, taking it all in with a quiet intensity that made Ahuli curious. The man's presence gave her a strange mixture of caution and hope. She did not know him, yet she felt as if he understood the injustice she faced. Something in the way he looked at her suggested respect rather than ownership. He did not see her as a commodity to be traded. He saw her as a person. And in that moment, surrounded by greed and noise, that simple recognition felt like a small miracle. Ahuli's mind raced as she considered her options. She had grown up learning to be careful, to read people and their intentions. This man could be another trader, another person who would exploit her, or he could be something different, a chance, perhaps, to change the path she had been forced onto. She could only wait and see. The market continued its chaotic rhythm, with merchants shouting, children laughing, and horses stamping in the distance. Ahuli stood silently, trying to make herself small while remaining visible enough to survive the scrutiny of the traders. She knew that one wrong move could seal her fate, but she also understood that courage sometimes required taking risks. Her gaze met the man's again, and she caught a hint of empathy in his eyes. That small connection, fleeting as it was, gave her a spark of strength she had not felt in days. Hours seemed to pass like minutes as the bargaining continued. The traders grew frustrated with each other, arguing over coins and the imagined value of a life they did not understand. Ahuli felt the tension building in the air like a storm about to break. Every offer that fell short of fairness tightened the knot in her chest. She wanted to speak, to demand justice, but words alone would not save her here. Actions were needed, and she had learned to wait for the right moment. The man who had been watching quietly finally stepped forward. His voice was calm, carrying a weight that silenced the market for a brief moment. "Enough," he said simply. All eyes turned toward him, some in surprise, others in irritation. He spoke not with anger but with authority, and something in his tone made the traders pause. "If you will not treat her with dignity, then I will take responsibility myself." Ahuli's heart leaped at the words. She did not fully understand what he meant yet, but she sensed that this man was different from anyone she had encountered. He was willing to intervene, to challenge the unfair system that had trapped her. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she might not be at the mercy of others, where she might have a chance to make her own choices. The traders muttered among themselves, clearly irritated by the interruption. They did not like being challenged, especially by a stranger who seemed willing to pay a fair price. The man remained steady, his eyes never leaving Ahuli's, and slowly the tension in the market began to shift. It was clear that he was not bargaining for profit, he was bargaining for her freedom. Ahuli felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. She did not know this man, and yet he had stepped into her life at a moment when hope seemed scarce. She thought of her ancestors, of the stories of resilience and courage, and she realized that sometimes help could come from the most unexpected places. Her spirit, once weighed down by fear and injustice, began to rise again, like a bird lifting its wings after a long storm. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows over the dusty town, Ahuli stood with her head held high, her eyes fixed on the man who had offered her a chance at something more. The market, once a place of humiliation and fear, now seemed like the starting point of a new journey. She did not yet know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she dared to hope. The day ended with the traders begrudgingly stepping aside, and Ahuli walking quietly beside the man who had chosen to intervene. She did not speak, but her silence was not fear. It was the calm before a new chapter. The dusty streets of the town had witnessed her suffering, but they had also witnessed the first spark of her liberation. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, Ahuli felt something she had not felt in a long time, the faint, thrilling sense that her life might finally belong to her, and not to anyone else. The sun had not yet fully risen when Elias walked through the quiet streets of the town, his boots making soft echoes against the wooden planks. The market from the day before was now just a memory, the stalls closed and the dust settling over the empty paths. Yet the memory of Ahuli's dark, determined eyes stayed with him. He had never seen someone treated so unfairly, yet remained so proud. It had struck him deeply, a pang of both sorrow and admiration. Elias had spent most of his life working his ranch, far from the noise and cruelty of the towns. He was used to hard work, early mornings, and the silence of the plains. But the sight of Ahuli had awakened something in him he hadn't felt in years, a strong desire to do what was right, even if it was uncomfortable, even if it went against the customs of the people around him. He could not stand idly by while someone as strong and dignified as Ahuli was treated as if her life were a mere commodity. As he made his way back to the edge of town, Elias thought about the offer he had made the day before. Some people might have misunderstood it, thinking he was buying her as one might buy a horse or a cow. But Elias knew better. He did not want ownership. He wanted to give her freedom. He wanted to take her somewhere safe, somewhere she could breathe and live on her own terms. The thought of this possibility filled him with a quiet hope. Meanwhile, Ahuli had spent the night in the small room the traders had reluctantly allowed her to use. Sleep came in fits and starts. Her mind kept replaying the events of the day, the traders' harsh words, their dismissive glances, and then the man who had stepped forward, calm and firm, offering a way out. Could someone really be that kind? She had been taught to be wary of strangers, to protect herself, to expect the worst from people. But something about him felt different, honest. She wanted to trust him, even though trust was dangerous. Morning light filtered through the small window, casting pale lines across the floor. Ahuli rose quietly, her mind made up. If the man truly intended to help her, she would follow him. She packed a few simple belongings, a small bundle of clothes, a knife her mother had given her for protection, and a piece of cloth to wrap her hair. She did not know where he would take her, but she felt a strange certainty that this was the right choice. As Elias arrived at the small building where Ahuli had been kept, he saw her waiting at the door. She carried herself with the same quiet strength he had noticed in the market. Her eyes, dark and alert, met his with a mixture of caution and curiosity. There was no fear in them now, only a steady determination. Elias felt a surge of respect and admiration for her. "Good morning," he said gently, keeping his voice calm so as not to startle her. "I hope I am not too early." Ahuli nodded slightly, her lips pressed together. She did not speak immediately, wary of what he might say. Elias understood her silence. He had seen enough in his life to know that words could be dangerous. Sometimes actions spoke louder than anything spoken aloud. He extended his hand, not in a gesture of ownership but as an invitation. "Shall we go?" he asked simply. Ahuli hesitated for only a moment before taking it. The contact was brief, but it carried a sense of reassurance. Together they stepped out into the early morning light, leaving the dusty town behind. The streets were empty, and the silence was almost deafening. It was a quiet kind of freedom, the first they both felt that day. The journey to Elias Ranch would not be long, but it was enough for Ahuli to begin understanding the man who had intervened on her behalf. Elias did not speak excessively. He allowed the silence to stretch comfortably between them. But occasionally, he would point to a distant hill or a cluster of trees and speak softly about the land, the animals, or the weather. His words were simple but filled with a deep knowledge and respect for life. Ahuli listened carefully, absorbing his words while also observing him. She noticed the steadiness in his movements, the care in his gestures, the calm in his voice. Unlike the traders who had treated her as property, Elias treated everything around him with respect, including her. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of trust, fragile but real, growing between them. As they walked, Elias occasionally asked questions, not about her past in a prying way, but about her thoughts, her experiences, her ideas. He wanted to know who she was, not just what she had endured. Ahuli answered cautiously at first, revealing small pieces of herself, little by little. She spoke of the land where she had grown up, the lessons her parents had taught her, and the pride she felt in her heritage. Elias listened, never interrupting, never judging. His attention made her feel seen in a way she had not felt for a long time. By midday, they reached the edge of Elias Ranch. The land stretched wide and open, with rolling hills, green pastures, and the distant glimmer of a river. Horses grazed peacefully, and the occasional bird flew overhead, singing into the wind. It was a stark contrast to the narrow, dusty streets of the town. The openness of the land mirrored the possibility of a new life, a life where Ahuli could breathe freely, without the constant weight of fear and judgment. Elias led her to a small cabin near the center of the ranch. It was simple, sturdy, and welcoming, with a porch that offered a wide view of the land. Inside, the cabin was clean and practical, with enough space for two people without feeling cramped. Elias gestured for Ahuli to look around. "This is your space too," he said gently. "You are free here. You don't have to do anything you don't want to." Ahuli's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had been given the chance to live, truly live, without fear or coercion. The idea was almost too much to take in at once. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but words failed her. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Elias understood her silence. "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "Just take your time. You are safe now." The days that followed were filled with small lessons and adjustments. Elias showed Ahuli how to navigate the ranch, introducing her to the animals, the land, and the routines of daily life. He never treated her as a servant or a possession. Instead, he encouraged her to learn at her own pace and to share her own knowledge. Ahuli, in turn, found herself teaching him some of the skills she had learned from her people: tracking, understanding the land, and respecting the balance of nature. Gradually, a rhythm developed between them. The mornings were spent working on the ranch, tending to animals or repairing fences. Afternoons were quieter, often spent walking through the fields or sitting near the river, watching the water flow and listening to the wind rustle through the trees. In these moments, Ahuli began to feel a sense of peace she had never known. The fear that had always accompanied her seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet curiosity and a growing confidence in herself. Elias never pressed her to speak of her past beyond what she was willing to share. He understood that her story belonged to her alone, and that trust could not be rushed. Yet in his presence, Ahuli felt safe enough to begin opening up, revealing fragments of her life in the town, the hardships she had endured, and the dreams she had once dared to hope for. Each story was met with understanding and empathy, never pity. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Elias and Ahuli sat together on the porch. The air was warm, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. Ahuli watched the sun sink behind the distant hills, feeling a sense of possibility she had never known. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could make choices freely, where she could define her own life rather than having it dictated by others. Elias broke the silence, his voice calm and steady. "The world can be cruel," he said softly, "but it doesn't have to define you. You have strength, Ahuli. Never forget that." Ahuli turned to him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and determination. "I won't," she whispered. "I will not let the world take my spirit again." In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. They were not bound by ownership or obligation, but by a shared respect and a willingness to see the best in each other. Elias had intervened when no one else would, offering her a chance at life and dignity. And Ahuli, in return, offered her trust, a precious gift earned through courage and compassion. As night fell, the stars emerging one by one in the vast western sky, Ahuli felt a sense of belonging she had never known. The journey ahead was still uncertain, and challenges would surely come, but for the first time, she felt she was walking a path of her own choosing. And beside her, Elias remained, not as a master, not as a protector, but as a companion who had chosen to see her for who she truly was. The world outside the ranch could remain harsh and unforgiving, but within these open fields and quiet nights, Ahuli discovered something invaluable: the chance to live with freedom, respect, and hope. And with that chance came a courage she had almost forgotten, the courage to face whatever came next, knowing she was no longer alone. The morning air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of wild grass and earth warmed by the sun. Ahuli stepped outside the cabin, her bare feet sinking slightly into the soft soil. She looked out over the vast expanse of the ranch, her eyes tracing the rolling hills, the grazing horses, and the shimmering river in the distance. Everything was so different from the narrow, dusty streets of the town. Here, the land seemed endless, and for the first time, Ahuli felt the possibility of freedom stretching out before her like the horizon itself. Elias was already outside, preparing for the day. He moved with a quiet efficiency, tending to the horses and checking the fences that ran across the property. The sun highlighted the lines of his face, showing strength, patience, and a calm determination that mirrored the land around him. He looked up when Ahuli approached and smiled warmly. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady. "Ready to see what today has in store?" Ahuli nodded. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Life at the ranch was unfamiliar to her, and though she had already begun to feel more comfortable, there were still so many unknowns. But the fear that had once gripped her chest was replaced by curiosity, a desire to learn and understand this new world that had been offered to her. Elias handed her a small bundle of supplies, a water canteen, a coil of rope, and a simple leather pouch. "We'll start with the animals," he said. "You'll need to understand them if you're going to be comfortable here." Ahuli followed him to the stables, where horses shifted their hooves and snorted softly, sensing the presence of newcomers. Elias moved among them with ease, speaking in soft tones and gentle gestures. Ahuli watched carefully, learning how to approach the animals without startling them, how to read their movements, and how to offer them reassurance. She marveled at the connection Elias had with the animals, the respect and understanding that guided every action. As the morning passed, Ahuli began to take on small tasks herself. She brushed the horses' coats, fed the chickens, and helped Elias mend a broken fence. Each task, though simple, filled her with a quiet sense of accomplishment. For so long, she had been treated as if she were incapable, as if her strength and intelligence were meaningless. Now, each small success was a reminder that she had the ability to care for herself and the world around her. During a brief break, they sat together under the shade of a large oak tree. Elias handed Ahuli a small loaf of bread and a piece of cheese. "You've done well today," he said, watching her carefully. "You're learning quickly." Ahuli smiled faintly. "I have to learn," she said softly. "I don't want to make mistakes." Elias nodded, understanding more than her words conveyed. "Mistakes are part of learning," he said gently. "You'll make them, and that's okay. What matters is that you keep trying." The afternoons on the ranch were quiet but full of life. The river sparkled under the sun, and birds flew overhead, their songs mingling with the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Ahuli explored the land alongside Elias, learning to recognize different plants, the signs of changing weather, and the ways of the animals that roamed freely. She began to see the land as more than just space. It was alive, with rhythms and secrets that demanded attention and respect. During one of their walks, Elias stopped near a patch of wildflowers. "These grow here naturally," he explained. "They don't need much care, but they're beautiful if you take the time to notice them." Ahuli knelt down, touching the soft petals gently. She thought about how life in the town had been harsh and unyielding, and how here, even the smallest things seemed to thrive. It reminded her that life could be gentle, that there was more to existence than survival alone. She felt a small spark of hope, a feeling that she could grow and flourish if given the chance. Evenings on the ranch were calm and comforting. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Elias would light a small fire outside the cabin, and they would sit together, sharing the quiet of the land. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they simply listened to the sounds around them, the crackle of the fire, the distant call of a bird, the gentle rustle of leaves. In these moments, Ahuli began to feel a sense of belonging that she had never experienced before. One evening, as they watched the stars appear one by one, Ahuli spoke softly. "I never thought I would see the sky like this," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Back in the town, the buildings block the stars. Here, it feels endless." Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The land gives you perspective, he said. It shows you that there's more to life than what you've been told, that even after hardship there is beauty and there is hope. Ahuli thought about her journey so far, the fear, the unfairness, the small moments of courage that had brought her to this place. She realized that while the past could not be changed, the present was hers to shape. She could learn, grow, and build a life that reflected her strength and spirit. And for the first time in her life, she believed that such a life was possible. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Ahuli grew more confident in her abilities. She learned to ride horses, tend to crops, and care for the animals with skill and patience. Elias guided her gently, never pushing, always encouraging. Their bond deepened, built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of what it meant to survive and thrive. Ahuli also began to share stories of her past, little by little. She spoke of her family, her childhood in the Apache lands, and the lessons her parents had taught her. Elias listened attentively, never judging, never interrupting. He understood that her past had shaped her, but it did not define her. In return, he shared pieces of his own life, his hardships, his losses, and the lessons he had learned from working the land. Through these exchanges, Ahuli and Elias formed a silent partnership. They were not master and servant, nor owner and property. They were two people learning from each other, bridging worlds and experiences, and discovering that life could be richer when shared with respect and understanding. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled over the plains. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the wind whipped through the fields, bending the tall grass. Elias and Ahuli worked together to secure the animals and protect the crops. The storm was fierce, but they faced it side by side, each relying on the other's strength and knowledge. When the storm finally passed, the land was battered but still alive, and so were they. The experience reinforced their trust and partnership, showing Ahuli that even in adversity, she could find support and resilience. As the seasons changed, Ahuli began to feel more at home on the ranch. The land, once vast and intimidating, now felt familiar and comforting. She moved through it with confidence, aware of its rhythms and secrets. And through it all, Elias remained a steady presence, guiding without controlling, protecting without confining. One quiet evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep indigo, Ahuli sat on a hill overlooking the ranch. She reflected on her journey so far, the fear, the unfairness, the moments of courage, and the trust she had learned to place in Elias. She realized that life could be both harsh and beautiful, that freedom was not just the absence of chains but the presence of choice, and that strength came not only from surviving but from allowing oneself to grow. Elias joined her on the hill, sitting quietly beside her. They watched the stars emerge, one by one, until the sky was a tapestry of light. Ahuli felt a sense of peace she had never known, a feeling that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "You've come a long way," Elias said softly, breaking the silence. Ahuli nodded. "I have," she replied, "and I'm still learning." Elias smiled. "We never stop learning," he said. "The important thing is that you keep going, keep growing, and keep believing in yourself." Ahuli looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and determination. "I will," she whispered. "I will not let the past define me. I will live my life fully, with strength and dignity." As night settled over the ranch, Ahuli felt a deep sense of belonging. She was no longer defined by the unfairness she had endured in the town. She was free to shape her own life, to learn, to grow, and to thrive. And with Elias beside her, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage and hope. The ranch, the land, and the wide, open sky became a symbol of possibility, a place where Ahuli could rediscover herself, where her spirit could flourish, and where she could finally feel the quiet strength of true freedom. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Ahuli felt that she was walking a path she had chosen, surrounded by respect, trust, and the promise of a life worth living. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm, a peaceful pattern that both comforted and challenged. Ashulai. The mornings were filled with the soft sounds of animals stirring, the clatter of hooves, and the distant calls of birds greeting the sun. She had learned to wake early, not because she was forced to, but because she wanted to. Each day brought new tasks and responsibilities, and with every task, Ahuli felt herself growing stronger, more capable, and more confident in her abilities. Elias had made it clear from the beginning that life on the ranch was not about control. It was about care, respect, and understanding. He taught Ahuli how to handle the animals, mend fences, and manage the small crops that sustained them. But more than that, he taught her to observe the land, to notice subtle signs in the weather, the soil, and the behavior of the animals. Ahuli quickly realized that living in harmony with the land required patience, attention, and respect. It was a lesson she had carried from her childhood among her people, and now she could apply it in a new context, with guidance and encouragement from Elias. The animals, too, responded to Ahuli's growing confidence. Horses that had once shied away from her now allowed her to approach, sniff, and brush them without fear. Chickens followed her footsteps, trusting her care, and the cattle recognized her presence as calm and steady. Each small success reinforced her belief in herself, and for the first time, she felt a sense of pride not born from survival alone, but from mastery and understanding. Afternoons were often spent exploring the ranch or working together on projects. Elias had begun to share more about the practical aspects of running the land, but he also took time to teach lessons that were not written in any manual. He spoke of patience, humility, and the importance of listening, not just to people, but to the land, the animals, and one's own instincts. Ahuli listened intently, absorbing each lesson and integrating it into her daily life. She began to see that freedom was not just about being away from cruelty. It was about learning, growing, and finding one's place in the world. One day, as they worked repairing a section of fence near the river, Elias paused and looked at Ahuli. "You've come a long way," he said softly, wiping sweat from his brow. "I think you're ready to try something more challenging." Ahuli looked at him, curiosity shining in her eyes. "What is it?" she asked. Elias smiled gently. "There's a section of the ranch that hasn't been tended in years. The animals avoid it because it's wild, full of thorns and uneven ground. I want you to help me clear it and make it usable again." Ahuli's heart raced. The task sounded difficult, even dangerous, but she also felt a thrill of excitement. This was an opportunity to prove to herself that she could handle more than she had ever imagined. "I'll do it," she said firmly. The work was demanding. Thorns tore at their clothes, uneven ground forced them to move carefully, and the sun beat down relentlessly. Yet with each hour, Ahuli's confidence grew. She learned to balance caution with courage, strength with patience. She discovered muscles she hadn't known she possessed, and an endurance she hadn't realized she could summon. Elias worked alongside her, never rushing, always encouraging, offering guidance when necessary but allowing her to find her own solutions. During breaks, they would sit together under the shade of a large oak tree, drinking water and catching their breath. Elias never pressured her to speak, but sometimes they would share quiet conversations about life, the land, or small observations. These moments built trust and understanding, creating a bond that went beyond words. Ahuli felt safe with him, not because he controlled her, but because he respected her strength and allowed her to shine in her own way. As days turned into weeks, Ahuli began to take on more responsibilities on the ranch. She tended to the animals, repaired fences, and even began helping Elias plan for the seasonal changes that would affect their land and crops. Each success brought a quiet satisfaction, a sense that she was contributing meaningfully to something larger than herself. For the first time, she felt that her life had purpose beyond mere survival. Evenings were often filled with quiet reflection. Ahuli would sit by the river, watching the water ripple and listening to the wind rustle through the trees. She thought about her past, the struggles she had endured, and the moments of fear and injustice. And yet, alongside those memories, she felt a growing sense of hope and gratitude. She had been given a chance to live freely, to learn, and to grow, and she intended to make the most of it. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the distant hills, Elias spoke softly. "Ahuli, I know life has not been fair to you," he said, his voice gentle. "But I see your strength. You have endured so much, and yet you continue to grow. That is something no one can take away from you." Ahuli turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I never thought I could feel safe or strong again, but here I do." Elias nodded, understanding more than words could convey. "Safety is not just the absence of danger," he said. "It's the presence of trust, respect, and understanding. You have earned that, Ahuli. Never forget it." The bond between them deepened, built not on ownership or obligation, but on mutual respect and trust. Elias had given Ahuli freedom, but it was Ahuli's own courage, determination, and wisdom that allowed her to thrive. She had learned to navigate the land, care for the animals, and understand the rhythms of life on the ranch. And through it all, she had discovered the quiet joy of being valued for who she was, not for what she could be forced to do. As the months passed, Ahuli began to explore the ranch with increasing confidence. She learned to recognize subtle changes in the weather, the signs of approaching storms, and the behavior of the animals in response to different conditions. She discovered the joy of planting seeds and watching them grow, the satisfaction of repairing a fence that had been broken for years, and the calm beauty of a sunrise over the open plains. Elias encouraged her to share her own knowledge and skills as well. Ahuli taught him techniques she had learned from her people, showing him how to read the land, track animals, and understand the natural balance of the environment. Their partnership became a true exchange of knowledge, each learning from the other and growing stronger together. One day, as they worked near the river, Elias paused and looked at Ahuli with admiration. "You've changed this ranch," he said. "Not just in the work you've done, but in the way you see and understand the land. You have a gift, Ahuli. Never doubt it." Ahuli felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of pride and accomplishment she had never known. She realized that her journey had not only given her freedom, but also purpose. She was no longer defined by the injustices she had endured. She was defined by her actions, her strength, and her growing understanding of the world around her. Evenings continued to be a time of quiet reflection and learning. Ahuli and Elias would sit together, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. They spoke of life, dreams, and the lessons they had learned. Ahuli shared stories of her ancestors, the Apache people, and the wisdom she had inherited. Elias shared his own experiences, the hardships he had faced, and the lessons the land had taught him. These conversations deepened their connection, creating a bond that was both strong and comforting. One night, as the moon rose high over the ranch, Ahuli felt a profound sense of peace. She thought about how far she had come, from the dusty, unforgiving streets of the town to the open, welcoming land of the ranch. She realized that she had not only survived but had begun to thrive. Her spirit was no longer weighed down by fear or injustice. It was free to grow, to explore, and to discover its own strength. Elias joined her on the porch, sitting quietly beside her. They watched the moonlight shimmer across the fields, casting gentle shadows over the land. "You've done well, Ahuli," he said softly. "You've taken everything life gave you and turned it into strength. That is something rare and precious." Ahuli smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. "You gave me a chance and I've learned to take it." Elias shook his head gently. "You didn't need me to make you strong," he said. "You were strong all along. I only helped you see it." Ahuli looked out over the ranch, her heart full of hope and determination. She realized that her journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned to navigate life with courage, patience, and respect. She had discovered the joy of learning, the satisfaction of accomplishment, and the beauty of a life lived with dignity. The ranch had become more than a place of safety. It was a place of growth, discovery, and possibility. And through it all, Ahuli had come to understand that freedom was not just about being away from cruelty, but about having the ability to learn, grow, and choose one's own path. As the night deepened and the stars shone brightly overhead, Ahuli felt a quiet sense of belonging. She was no longer defined by the injustices of the past. She was defined by her strength, her wisdom, and her courage. And with Elias beside her, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with confidence, hope, and the knowledge that she was capable of shaping her own destiny. The days on the ranch had grown long and full of life, each one offering new lessons and opportunities. Ahuli had transformed from a cautious, fearful young woman into someone strong, confident, and aware of her own value. She moved across the land with ease, her steps sure and deliberate, her hands steady in every task. Each animal she tended, each field she cared for, was a reflection of her growing confidence and independence. Elias watched her often, sometimes from a distance, with a quiet pride. He had seen her endure the hardships of her past and emerge stronger, more resilient than he had ever imagined. But he also knew that her strength was not just physical. It was the strength of spirit, the courage to claim her own life, and the wisdom to see the world clearly. The unfairness she had faced in the town had left its mark, but it had not broken her. It had only prepared her for the life she was now creating. One morning, Ahuli stood near the river, watching the water flow over smooth stones. The sunlight sparkled on the surface, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. She thought about the town she had left behind, about the traders who had tried to place a price on her life, and about the moment Elias had intervened. That memory no longer brought fear or anger, it brought gratitude. Gratitude for the chance to live freely, to learn, and to grow. Elias approached quietly, carrying a small basket of food. "Good morning," he said softly. "I thought we could have breakfast by the river today." Ahuli smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reflected her contentment. "I would like that," she replied. They sat together on the bank, the water flowing gently beside them. They ate in companionable silence, each taking comfort in the quiet beauty of the morning. It was a peaceful moment, a reminder that life could be gentle and kind, even after so much hardship. After breakfast, they walked through the fields, checking on the animals and the crops. Ahuli moved confidently, pointing out signs of growth or areas that needed attention. Elias listened attentively, sometimes offering guidance, sometimes allowing her to make her own decisions. The balance between teaching and learning had shifted. She was no longer just a student but a partner, contributing to the life of the ranch with skill and insight. As the day went on, Ahuli reflected on how much she had changed. She remembered the fear that had gripped her in the town, the sense of helplessness that had made every day a struggle to survive. Now, she felt empowered. She had learned to trust herself, to understand the land, and to face challenges with courage. The ranch had given her more than safety. It had given her the chance to reclaim her life. Elias noticed the thoughtful look on her face. "What are you thinking about?" he asked gently. Ahuli looked at him, her eyes reflecting both strength and gratitude. "I'm thinking about how far I've come," she said. "I never imagined life could be like this. I feel free for the first time in my life." Elias nodded. "You've earned that freedom," he said. "It's not just about leaving the past behind. It's about building something new, something that belongs to you." Ahuli smiled. "And I want to continue building it," she said. "I want to keep learning, keep growing, and keep living in a way that makes me proud." The days passed in a rhythm of work, learning, and reflection. Ahuli became an expert in caring for the animals, tending to the land, and managing the day-to-day tasks of the ranch. She discovered new skills, like mending tools and tracking animals, and she began to teach Elias some of the techniques she had learned from her Apache heritage. Together, they shared knowledge, exchanged ideas, and grew stronger as partners in both work and understanding. One afternoon, a neighboring rancher came by, curious about the young woman who had come to live with Elias. He had heard whispers in town about the Apache woman who now thrived on the ranch. When he saw Ahuli working confidently alongside Elias, handling the animals with ease, he was impressed. "She's remarkable," he said quietly to Elias. Elias nodded. "Yes, she is," he replied. "She has strength, intelligence, and courage. She's more than capable of taking care of herself in this land." The visiting rancher looked at Ahuli with respect, no trace of the judgment or greed that had characterized the town. Ahuli felt a quiet satisfaction. She realized that her worth was no longer determined by others' opinions or by the cruel valuations of traders. Her worth was her own, defined by her skills, her courage, and her choices. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of gold and pink, Ahuli and Elias sat together on the porch of the cabin. The land stretched endlessly before them, alive with the soft sounds of evening, crickets chirping, animals settling down, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. It was a peaceful moment, a contrast to the chaos and fear of her past life. Ahuli spoke softly, her voice thoughtful. "I never thought I would feel at home somewhere," she said. "I never imagined life could be this fulfilling." Elias looked at her with a gentle smile. "Home isn't just a place," he said. "It's a feeling. It's where you are valued, where you are free to grow, and where your spirit is respected. You found that, Ahuli." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words. For so long, she had been treated as if she were less than human, as if her life were something to be bought or controlled. Now, she understood that her past did not define her. She was capable, strong, and worthy of respect. The ranch had given her the opportunity to discover that truth for herself. As night fell, the stars emerged, one by one, painting the sky with a tapestry of light. Ahuli felt a profound sense of peace as she gazed upward. She had survived, learned, and grown. She had faced injustice and fear, yet she had emerged stronger and wiser. The journey had not been easy, but it had led her to a life filled with freedom, purpose, and hope. Elias joined her quietly, sitting beside her and watching the stars as well. "You've changed," he said softly, "not just in what you do, but in who you are. You've become someone truly remarkable." Ahuli looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it alone," she said. "You showed me kindness and respect when no one else did. But I've also learned to believe in myself. That's what makes the difference." Elias nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "You've taken what life gave you and made it your own," he said. "That is the true measure of strength." The months continued to pass, each day reinforcing Ahuli's growth and confidence. She had become an integral part of the ranch, respected not only by Elias but by anyone who saw her skill, intelligence, and courage. Her spirit, once weighed down by fear and unfairness, now soared with the freedom she had earned. Ahuli often reflected on her journey, the moments of fear, the small acts of courage, and the turning point when Elias had chosen to intervene on her behalf. That single act of compassion had changed the course of her life, but it was her own determination, strength, and resilience that had allowed her to flourish. She had learned that true freedom was not simply escaping danger, but embracing life fully, making choices with confidence, and valuing oneself in every step. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light over the fields, Ahuli walked through the ranch, her eyes bright with purpose. She had plans for the day, tasks to accomplish, and knowledge to apply. She knew that challenges would come, as they always did, but she felt ready. She had faced hardship before and had emerged stronger. Now she embraced life with courage, wisdom, and a sense of joy that she had never known. Elias watched her from a distance, a quiet smile on his face. He had seen many people come and go, but few had the combination of courage, strength, and wisdom that Ahuli possessed. She had taken the opportunity he had offered and had transformed it into something extraordinary. She had become not just a survivor but a person fully alive, capable of shaping her own destiny. As the day drew to a close, Ahuli stood on a small hill overlooking the ranch. The wind blew gently through her hair, carrying the scent of earth and grass. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the injustice and fear of the town to the freedom and purpose of the ranch. She realized that while the past would always be a part of her, it no longer controlled her. She was the author of her own life, and she intended to live it fully, with strength, dignity, and hope. Elias joined her on the hill, standing quietly beside her. They watched the sun set together, the sky ablaze with color, a reminder of the beauty and possibility in the world. Ahuli felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the land, the animals, and the work, but for the chance to live a life of her own choosing. "You've found your place," Elias said softly, breaking the silence. Ahuli nodded, a warm smile on her face. "Yes," she said, "I have. And I will continue to grow, to learn, and to live with the strength and courage that life has taught me." As darkness fell and the stars appeared in the sky, Ahuli felt a sense of completion and new beginnings. She had faced injustice, found compassion, reclaimed her freedom, and discovered the power within herself. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led her to a life of purpose, dignity, and hope. And in the quiet of the night, surrounded by the land, the animals, and the man who had chosen to see her for who she truly was, Ahuli understood a profound truth, that even in a world filled with unfairness, courage, compassion, and determination could create a life worth living. She had survived, learned, grown, and thrived, and the horizon ahead was filled with endless possibilities.